Well, Bryan, the reason we bring you on, Husker football recruiting, Huskers did it. They completed the trifecta of flips we talked about not long ago. Dawson Merritt officially decommits from Alabama, commits to Nebraska. What does that mean for the Huskers and for the 25 class?
Obviously he jumps in and he's the number one rated or the top rated player, in the class. I mean, he's the number 16 edge, I think is what it was, and number 150-ish kind of player overall nationally. He's a big time get. I mean, everybody says edge is a position. I think people kind of lose like what it actually is. He's a 6'3", 6'3.5-ish kind of 215-pound guy. If he's a hand in the dirt guy, it's not anything like immediate at all. I mean, I think really this guy, you can see him as kind of a 2-point kind of standing, pin your ears back kind of guy that can get after the quarterback, is very, very capable of going sideline to sideline, making plays. He makes a lot of his plays behind the line of scrimmage, which is exactly what Nebraska needs. He is fun to watch on film. I don't know if I can just encourage everybody to go out there and find his huddle. He flashes all the time. And he has got some really, really nice film to kind of go out there and check out. He'll be back in town this weekend as a Nebraska commitment, which is huge. So as Nebraska is kind of trying to finish things out and round things out, with, other players and trying to put some finishing touches on the 2025 class, never hurts to have a guy like Merritt jump in for the sake of people that are kind of maybe still trying to find that positive thing to kind of put Nebraska over the top. You basically get a guy from an Alabama commitment to flip. And I think the bigger picture here that I think you can't undersell this. Nebraska makes another nice big play into the Kansas City metro area, particularly for next year. There's a lot of really good players in the 2026 class and obviously the 2027 and 2028 classes that Nebraska has already offered and have hosted a number of times already. So I think there's a lot of good things out of this commitment for Nebraska.
How are things going with the in-state? This is just from my personal knowledge. In-state recruit tight end. We're looking at the tight end position. Haven't really seen a lot of work out of the tight end position as far as top talent at this point, or use of them. But what's your thoughts on Chase Lofton?
Yeah, I think Chase is an interesting dude. I think he's tight end classified, but he's really more of a hybrid flex style. Why? He's not really a true tight. I mean, if you look at the class currently and you have Bear Kenny that's there from Utah, and Bear's really more of a third offensive tackle. Let's just go ahead and say it. I mean, I think that he has great athletic ability and he has really soft hands, but I think that what Nebraska really likes about him is that he's a savage when it comes to blocking. And I think that that's going to be music to the ears of some Nebraska fans. But then I think you take a look at a player like Lofton, like Carter Nelson even, and you say, can Carter Nelson or Lofton be that guy? And the answer to that question, is like, not immediately. You're really looking at more of a hybrid kind of style player. And I think with Lofton, I think what's tremendous about him is that yeah, he has that size, but he also has great athleticism. I think it's also that he's a fabulous route runner for how big he is. And I think that that's what really kind of firmly puts him in the camp of really probably more of a guy that works out of the wide receiver room, and maybe plays more of like a slot kind of guy versus the guy that's going to be hand in the dirt, playing closer to the offensive tackle position. But I think Nebraska needs to develop that role. And I think this is where maybe you were kind of going with your question. I think that Nebraska has got a player, like Lofton on the roster, like with Carter Nelson. And Carter has had a couple of opportunities to kind of go out there and make some plays as a freshman. And clearly he is very athletic and he's fun to see when they get the ball, into his hands. But I think it's a position that Nebraska really has to sit down and figure out some ways to kind of get it a little bit more involved. I don't think that they're there yet. You know, I think that they're still trying to find ways to kind of get that guy involved in the players that are kind of more in that flex Y style kind of position that are really sitting more in the wide receivers room. So I think Lofton still holding pat on that Florida State commitment, at least for now. But I know that he's got some other teams, you know, stepping up that want him to take a look at him, like Missouri, and obviously Nebraska is making a push here too, trying to close out the 2025 class. But I think Nebraska needs to find a better role and define it better for some of those players that are more like Lofton and Nelson.
Yeah.
To that point, Matt Rule's talked a lot about recruiting versatile players that can do a lot of different things. There's a time and a place for that. Is it okay for Nebraska maybe to take a flyer or two like that and have a guy or two like that on the roster, and they need to specialize elsewhere? Is this just a Matt Rule thing where they just want versatile players? They'll call them football guys, whatever you will, and they'll just take the best football players they think they can find and just see what the body develops into and see what they can do once they actually get to campus?
You know, it's a slippery slope.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people tell you that they should recruit frames when it comes to being an offensive tackles or offensive lineman. And I tell you, sometimes those guys don't develop. And I think that you have to go after aggressiveness, an aggressive style, tenacity. Maybe it's intelligence, maybe it's something else. But I think people get I think Division I athletics in general is about checking the box. You're never going to go back to your coach if you're an assistant coach and say, I found this 6'2" offensive tackle, and I think we need to offer him, because it's not prototypical.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, you need to find those guys that are maybe towards the lower side, or at least maybe check the box, but then they have another box or two to kind of go along with it that you really need to bring into the room. Like I said, like an aggressive style, you know, maybe a guy that plays other sports, so he's a versatile athlete. Maybe a guy like, I love interior offensive linemen that are wrestlers. I'll just be flat out honest with you. I think guys that understand leverage, understand how to keep a strong base, that they can apply that very, very quickly to a football field. So I think that you have to kind of put those things together, but D1s are very different. You've got to check boxes. They all have to kind of look very similar. They have to project, I think, to getting to the next level. D2s, you can kind of come down off of that. You're really looking for ball players first. So yeah, I think that's probably, you know, the part there where it gets to be a little slippery, but I think Nebraska, I think you just can't go out there and just say it's frame, it's size each and every time. I think the ball skills obviously matter, and you have to get just past the prototypical side, and they have the longest arm reach, or they have the biggest shoe or whatever. What else are they good at? You know, and not just tell me that you're going to bring in the dude that's going to break the tape measure. You need to find a spot in which he makes sense and try to develop him.
And that's interesting, because I think both sides of this argument I'm about to lay out could say we just trust our process, right? Matt Rule can say that he trusts their development, their recruiting process, because they've seen good football players, they take good football players, and they put them in drills, they see where they fit, they see what the body develops into. That's been the way they've done it. But I think there's an argument for the other side of this, Bryan, too, where there are plenty of coaches throughout history who need guys to check the box, who miss out on maybe some players that go under the radar because they're not prototypical size. But when those coaches go outside of their boxes to check, like you said, it's either because, you know, all the boxes are actually checked and no one else sees it, or maybe there is an unchecked box, but one box is double checked. It's an elite standout trait that makes it worth the flyer. And those players are almost the exception that prove the rule to those coaches about why they go after guys with frames and why it was acceptable for them to go outside of their normal framework for this particular player.
Well, and it's like, you know, I've had this conversation online a couple times on Red Sea Scrolls where, you know, we're talking about a 6'1" defensive tackle, for an example. And you bring up Aaron Donald, and you bring up Ed Oliver, and you talk about what makes those guys kind of special, because they don't have Ndamukong Suh kind of size, right? Like they're they're a couple 3 inches shorter than Sue was. But what you have to see is on the football field is that they are capable of doing things differently, and that you're not going to hold against them the matter of not being prototypically sized. That you have tremendous athletes, you have incredibly strong dudes that have this ability to get upfield and make plays unlike anybody else like you've ever seen. And maybe, like you said, check the box twice or as strongly of any other person as you ever had to check the box for, that you've evaluated before. Mm-hmm. So I think that those are absolutely scenarios that evaluators and evaluations need to consider when it comes to that. Like, do you get around not being ideally sized because you have a playmaker, potentially at a position? I think it's a little bit more difficult to do on the offensive line. But I think at other spots, I can always go around and kind of try to find exceptions, when it comes to guys, particularly like interior defensive linemen. It's a little hit or miss. Like, I think that typically you'd find, 6'3", 6'4", 6'5". Chris Jones being the high side of that, to a Calais Campbell, potentially as well. Like, he's a massive human being, down to an Aaron Donald or to an Ed Oliver, for example.
Two quick ones to wrap up with you here. Bryan Munson of Husker Online, our guest on our Allo Fiber VIP line. Nebraska against Wisconsin will welcome 2027 quarterback target Trey Taylor to town. What does Nebraska see in him? What do you see in Trey Taylor? Where do the Huskers stand with him right now?
Well, he's a very busy dude. I mean, he has taken a lot of trips. Nebraska offered him recently, I think in the October timeframe when he was up there for a visit. He loved it. His dad loved it. I mean, this is really a guy, in my opinion, that Nebraska has jumped squarely into the sweepstakes to get. And this is maybe a player that's trending a little bit more to Michigan right now, and like I said, I mean, he's been, I think it was 45 or 46 visits, already in total. He's already been to Michigan 12 times. I was just pulling up his profile right now. He's been to Michigan 12 times, and he's been on 46 unofficial visits that we know of. So if you put Michigan and Michigan State and Notre Dame together, that would be half of all the trips that he has taken already, and that's 23 out of 46 for those three schools. So I think Nebraska is up against it a little bit. Michigan's in really kind of an interesting situation, obviously, because I don't know if you guys are paying attention to with what's going on.
Bryce Underwood, right?
Yeah, with Bryce Underwood and Dave Portnoy and the NIL money that's getting kicked around for him. It's 4 years for $10.5 million or something like that. I mean, just unbelievable kind of numbers being thrown around there. So obviously something that Trey would be interested in kind of hearing how it's going to work out. So Trey Turner, interesting guy, had one of the most memorable interviews I had all last month talking to him. I think Nebraska has got a really nice chance here. It's just the way things look historically with him, you would think Michigan is definitely the trending team for him at the moment.
Last thing for you then, Bryan, obviously Nebraska gets its final home game of the year. You mentioned Taylor's going to be in town, Dawson Merritt in town as a Nebraska commit. What does this weekend look like for the Huskers as they host Wisconsin? What does a strong finish to the 2025 class look like?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I mean, they get Merritt there in town, like I mentioned before, and Kate Petchock's coming in. I haven't heard anything yet about, Chase Lawson be able to kind of get back, or if a Michael Terry III potentially can get in. And we're waiting on some more guys to kind of come in. I know that 2028 they're going to bring in a guy, Darius Smiley, who's a big-time offensive tackle from St. Louis, another guy that Keith Williams is doing a great job in recruiting. So we'll know a little bit more tomorrow, probably more towards the Wednesday timeline about who's going to be coming in. But the 2:30, I think it just needs to be mentioned, the 2:30 start time basically makes every one of the home games in Nebraska had this season, favorable to where, players could travel in, leaving out on Saturday morning. So that was huge for the Huskers this year in their class. And I think it sets up big things for them in the 2026 and 2027 class.
That's Bryan Munson of Husker Online, the voice you hear, Bryan Munson _ on Twitter, HuskerOnline.com. Bryan, as always, truly appreciate the insight. Congrats again on the Bills' regular season victory. Well, keep tracking it. Tight race for the AFC 1 seed. Lots coming down the pipe in Husker recruiting. Thanks as always, my friend.
Yes, sir, guy. We'll see you guys.